Showdown on guns. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid announced today he's going to call for a vote on gun control legislation on Thursday, and more than a dozen conservative Republicans have vowed to block the bill with a filibuster. That, though, is not stopping Joe Biden.
I promise you, we are going to win this fight. We are going to win this fight. This is not going away. This is not one of these votes, if they block a vote, that somehow we're going to go away. The American public will not stand for it.
Well, earlier tonight, I spoke to Senator Tom Coburn, Republican of Oklahoma. He's a key Republican on this, an influential player in negotiating an agreement on background checks. And I asked him whether he thinks the Senate is going to make a deal.
I'm a Second Amendment hawk, I'm a gun owner, but I believe we actually could do something that would lessen the probability that a dangerous person would get a gun, and do that in a way that doesn't interfere with our Second Amendment rights or states' 10th Amendment rights. And that's why I've been discussing this with Chuck Schumer and others. I think we ought to, if we can do that and not impair anybody's actual rights, I think we ought to do that. I think it's common sense, and I think it could have a great outcome for the American community.
When we talk about universal background checks, and 91% of Americans are in favor of those, what do you support exactly happening?
Well, 91% of Americans support an enhanced background check, provided there's no record. That's a very big difference, and so I think that's an important qualification of that statistic. What I think is people ought to be responsible, that if they have a gun they want to sell it, they ought to make sure they're not selling it to somebody that's mentally impaired or a felon. And I think we can figure out a way to do that in the U.S. Congress that won't impinge on anybody's rights.
You're a gun owner, right? And you haven't done anything wrong. So what would be, as a law-abiding citizen, what would be the reason why you say the government can't know that you bought a gun?
Because the government doesn't have a right under the Constitution to know whether I bought a gun or not. My right to self-defense and my Second Amendment rights under the Constitution doesn't give the government the right to have any knowledge of that.
So do you really think, though, that, I mean, that's what the government would try to do if they had this list,
No,
that they would use it to confiscate the guns?
It doesn't matter what you think the government will do. What matters is what the U.S. Constitution says. We're chasing a rabbit now. The point is most people who are law-abiding citizens and gun owners are law-abiding citizens, and they'll do the right thing. But there is no right for the government to have a list of who owns a gun in the United States.
I'm also curious, though, about what might happen here, when you look at the issue with background checks. Last night I spoke to Larry Pratt. I know you're familiar with him, Executive Director of Gun Owners for America, which is a very influential pro-gun lobbying group, even more influential, some say, than the NRA. I asked him how we prevent people who right now, if you're on the terror watch list, you can buy a gun. And I asked him if that should be okay, and here's how he answered that question.
That list is sort of like voodoo. Nobody really knows how the names get on the list. Nobody knows exactly what they've done. They haven't had due process. Now, if you want to live in a dictatorship, fine, just go ahead and do something like that. But we don't think that's the way America wants to work.
Now, Senator, are you okay with people who are listed on the terror watch list buying a gun?
No, I'm not. And I'm not okay with people who are convicted of a felony, especially a violent felony, from buying a gun either. Here's the question that ought to be asked. Do we as Americans think people who are mentally impaired and are a danger to themselves or somebody else, or people who are convicted felons of crime, I'm not talking white-collar crime, but crime, should they have their rights limited when it comes to buying a gun? And I think most Americans would agree that they probably should.
So the man Larry Pratt, that you just heard him talk about the terror watch list, obviously a different point of view than you on that one. But the New York Times says his group, quote, inundated you with calls to make it clear to you that an enhanced background check wouldn't be tolerated. And the New York Times says you backed away from the negotiations with Chuck Schumer because of that.
That's just totally inaccurate. I didn't back away from any negotiations. Chuck Schumer quit talking to me. I've had a position that's been the same all along. I'm willing to do what it takes to actually make a difference so we don't have guns in the hands of people who shouldn't have them. How we do that is important. Where Chuck and I differed, it was how we did that. But I didn't back away from it. Look, I'm not ever running for another elective office. I believe in the Constitution. I actually follow the Constitution. I don't pay attention to interest groups.
And a final question, sir, in terms of this filibuster. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said he's going to filibuster. 13 other Republican senators have joined him.
It's not going to be filibustered.
It's going to. Yeah.
No, it's not. It's going, provided Harry Reid actually has an open amendment process where he guarantees us if we have legitimate bills that are within the scope of this bill and we have legitimate amendments, if he's not going to limit those, we ought to have this debate. America needs to know where we stand. They need to know where we stand on protecting the Bill of Rights, but they also need to know where we stand in terms of common sense.
All right. Thanks very much to Tom Coburn. And one person watching the gun control debate very closely is former